Two of those 37 samples, or 5%, had nitrate levels above 10 parts per million, and 10 of them, or 27%, were above 5 parts per million. In the larger 2019 study, 17 wells, or 18%, were above 10 parts per million, and 24, or 25% of them, were above 5 parts per million. There are some other samples dating from that area, dating back to 1993, which indicated that there was a problem developing. And while I don't have the access to the technology that ERIC has, my impression, based on the data that I have, is that the groundwater quality with regard to nitrate is not improving and is likely getting worse. And I'm going to leave that to ERIC to explore that further, because he's got way better technology than I do. There were a couple other areas that caught my attention because there were little clusters of elevated nitrate levels. One of those was around Range, and the other one was in Farmington Township. Because the high nitrate in groundwater is a human health issue, those areas merit further investigation. One area that really kind of surprised me, and I was even a little bit shocked, was Section 32 in Garfield Township. That's only about 4 miles from where I live. Section 32 is basically the settlement of wanderers. For many years, the area around that location, around that area, was a sizable free-range turkey operation. And the waste from the turkeys pretty much fell where the turkeys dropped it and stayed there. In 1989, 10 wells were sampled in that area, in that section. 8 of the 10 were over 5 parts per million, and 6 were over 10 parts per million. And those 6 ranged from 11.9 parts per million to 51.9, and they averaged about 25 parts per million, which is 2.5 times the state recommendation for drinking water. In 1990, I'm not used to talking through this mask, and because it is N95, it's difficult to get air in and out. So if I start panting, that's the reason.
We can hear you pretty good.
Okay. Anyway, in 1990, 32 wells were sampled. 87% of them were over 10 parts per million. Those samples range from 13 parts per million to 80 parts per million, which is 8 times the recommended level. Of those, over a third, or 10 of them, were over 40 parts per million. Samples taken from 1991 to 1993 continued to show significant contamination in a high percentage of samples. I don't have any other data until 2006, when there was a single sample that had a level of 28 parts per million. And I don't have any information on how those people dealt with that well contamination. Did they dig new wells? Did they put in filtration equipment? Or did they just live with it? And I don't know if the Department of Health and staff can dig back and find out what happened. I'm just kind of curious about that, how people responded to that and what they did to protect their health. There are several other samples with elevated nitrate kind of scattered around the county, but there were not enough in any one particular area that it raised a level of concern with me. However, there weren't a lot of samples taken, and because of the nitrate contamination is a significant and growing problem in the state of Wisconsin. That's well documented. The health issues associated with that contamination are also well documented. Polk County is not an exception to what's happening in the rest of the state. I would recommend that citizens that can afford the $40 get their wells tested. And I'm hopeful I'm going to be able to pick up a couple of sampling bottles from the health department today so I can get my own wells tested this week. So like many environmental problems, nitrate pollution is far cheaper to prevent than it is to cure. So I'd urge this county committee to do some funding, do some further study of this. On the way up here this morning, I had a phone conversation with a friend of mine, Dr. Mark Borkart, who heads up the USDA Agricultural Research Water Quality Lab in Marshfield, Wisconsin. And I talked to him. He was the guy in charge of the studies in Kewaunee County and now the three in Grant, Lafayette, and Iowa counties in southwestern Wisconsin. And I asked him about what it would cost to do what that study cost. And he said for those three counties, which the counties funded most of it, but they did get a grant, sizable grant from DNR, and the total came to about a little over $200,000. But he said if you're looking to sample only for nitrates, he estimated that you could do a well-done county-wide sampling for nitrates. You could do that for about $25,000. He also told me that Dunn County recently got a grant from Department of Health Services under a health concern type of thing of somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 to do that type of study there. And you know the head of the Dunn County Land and Water, that's the person that kind of coordinated this whole thing. And if you're interested, that money is available. There is also money available from the DNR under a pollution program. So I would recommend that you take some time and study that out a little bit. You may be able to get quite a bit of good work done and not have it cost a lot of out-of-pocket county money. So what causes nitrate pollution? Failing septic systems may cause nitrate issues in a well or two on a localized basis. Land spreading of septic and sometimes excess land spreading of septic can sometimes be an issue. And in Wisconsin, most problems with nitrates can be traced to over-application of commercial fertilizer or runoff from manure. Now, most farmers want to be good stewards of the land, and most accomplish that goal they're pretty good at accomplishing that goal. People like Eric and the others in the Land Conservation Department do a wonderful job of setting up demonstration projects that inform and educate farmers about best management practices that can help prevent problems. In Wisconsin, best management practices are voluntary and may depend on the availability of funds to defray the costs associated with implementing them. However, not every farmer is open to changing how they do things, and it doesn't take very many of those to cause problems. The county has the authority to require groundwater monitoring around CAFOs. I would tell you it's interesting to note that in Denmark, where best management practices have been made mandatory, that country has seen nitrate levels decrease in groundwater decrease across the whole country. Concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, are required to have a nutrient management plan that details how and where they will spread their manure. From my personal experience while serving on the Natural Resources Board, I have knowledge of nutrient management plans that claim to have permission to spread manure on certain properties when in fact the CAFO had never contacted the owner of those properties. In another instance, landowners had given permission for multiple CAFOs to spread on the same piece of ground. The problem with these abuses was widespread enough that Greene County enacted an ordinance requiring CAFOs to file written documentation with the county of the agreement with the landowner where they be spreading. This county has the ability to do that same thing, and I would recommend that. There are probably some of you that are thinking that the DNR approves those nutrient management plan and monitors them. that the DNR is going to look out for our best interest. Wrong. I have a lot of respect for DNR staff. They are hardworking folks that take their job seriously, and they do the best that they can. However, DNR is so understaffed that there just isn't time to adequately monitor and spot check for compliance on the nutrient management plan. And if you'll excuse the pun, because of that staff shortage, shit sometimes falls through the cracks. The health of our citizens is your responsibility, and you can't rely totally on the DNR to do your job. So when your private well gets contaminated, who pays to remediate the problem? Well, if you go on the Wisconsin DHS website, it says, it's your well, you are responsible, you fix it. Basically, that's what they're saying. And while the DNR does have some grants available for well replacement for low-income families, nitrate and bacterial contamination are specifically exempted. You can't get money for that unless, of course, your well also furnishes at least 100 gallons a day of water to water livestock. So evidently it's okay for people to drink the water, but we can't have the livestock consuming it. In theory, in this country, we operate on the polluter pays principle. For example, when a utility builds a power plant and that power plant causes pollution, the utility is responsible for the costs of limiting that pollution. That cost is then passed on to the ratepayers. Because of the way that their commodities are marketed, farmers have no way to pass on those costs. And that means that individuals and society as a whole bear the cost of that contamination. To me, the thought of a foreign-owned corporation establishing a hog CAFO in Polk County and then letting them take the profits elsewhere while leaving our citizens to pay the cost of contaminated groundwater and health issues kind of puts a bitter taste in my mouth. Data from Iowa indicates that 22% across the state, 22% of private wells and fully 1/3 of their cities face elevated nitrate problems. Many of those private well owners in some of the smaller cities simply cannot afford to remedy the problem, thus forcing them to drink unhealthy water. Thinking there won't be impacts on groundwater quality and the health of our citizens from a hog CAFO is like the Packer fan that lost $25 on last year's playoff game against San Francisco, and then being so sure that the Pack couldn't possibly lose twice, bet $50 on the instant replay. It is vitally important that this committee and the county board do everything possible to safeguard the quality of our groundwater and the health of our citizens. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for pulling stuff together. Do you have any of that in a form? At least some of the percentages that I was writing as fast as I can that you could share with us?
I have that on. Basically, I came up with those numbers from looking at all the well test data. I have it in my email, and I will send it to your clerk, and she can distribute it.
Okay.
That would be wonderful.
David, like in Farmington, we got this heavy loam soil, and just about every real estate sale in Farmington on a home basis, they have to have this, what do you call it? For drinking water, you have to put another line in.
Reverse osmosis.
Yes, correct. And on all our dairy, like in our, when we had the drinking cups and that, we had to switch to reverse osmosis. But as people living in Farmington, I don't think anybody's really aware, and I don't know anybody that even has that we should have.
Well, and that's the issue, and that's one of the reasons I got interested in this is I was completely unaware that this problem happened to Wanderers, and when I think it's a good thing when I went to the UW Wanderers that I majored in beer drinking, not water.
Well, I remember, I'm probably,
So I was just unaware of that, and I think when I look at these water tests, I'll see somebody that has a high test, and one or two of their neighbors around will test because they've had, coffee talk, and well, my nitrate was high. Well, I better check mine. But by and large, people are just not aware of it, and that's why I would urge you to try to do what you can do to secure some funding and try to get a little better handle on it, just so we know where we're at. I'd be really happy if we found out there wasn't a problem at all, but I don't quite think that's the case.
Dr. Loggins, could you give us any idea of how nitrate affects our body? I mean, this is a result of this presentation.
Well, I think that there was a good presentation here in the first paragraph here that nitrates is a water-soluble molecule that forms when ammonia or other nitrogen-rich sources combined with oxygen. Concentration of nitrate in water often reported nitrate N, which reflects only the mass of nitrate and nitrate. Nitrate levels in groundwater are generally below 2 parts per million where pollution sources are absent. So if you're above that, as he reported, there are many nitrate tests today, usually agriculture or turf fertilizers, animal waste, septic systems, or wastewater. And the infants below 6 months are really at risk because they can end up what's called methemoglobinemia, which is a blue baby syndrome. When the infant's oxygen combines with nitrate, it can cause death. I don't know what, in 2000, there were 3 cases of blue baby syndrome in Wisconsin with nitrate contaminated drinking water. And actually, I had somebody a couple weeks ago ask me who lives in Milltown about methemoglobinemia, so I'm going to have to get back with him.
Yeah, the other thing that is well documented is colorectal cancer. And I think possibly some thyroid issues also. We've probably got the expert right there who can.
Both of those things, the colorectal cancer and thyroid abnormalities are associated, but even if you don't have the blue babies, you've got inadequate oxygenation to the kids, and that's going to affect growth and development too.
Basically, when I was researching this, I looked. Iowa considers anything over 5 parts per million to be at some type of put you at increased risk for the effects of nitrate contamination.
So Dr. Loggins, actually, a danger that's most prevalent would be mostly in babies.
Well, they have the highest risk, but
They're most susceptible.
as yes, the person back of me here was saying that there are other things like colon cancer to adults and thyroid disease. So I'm going to have to research this more and report back to you at a subsequent meeting. But
That would be very helpful.
The National Institute of Health has a real good publication on that, and I think it is by Dr. Fisher, if I'm correct. I'll send you the link to that article.
Okay, good.
If you'd like
If
to.
you would.
David, before you go, what are the minimum and maximum standards?
So the Department of Health and the EPA, their level is 10 parts per million because that is the level that will cause blue baby syndrome. However, there are health departments now that are saying at 5 parts per million, it puts adults at risk for colorectal cancer and thyroid problems.
Bob, do you have anything in your area there that, like on real estate on a water test, you guys, any any sale, they come up here with a water test. At what level do they have to put in a reverse osmosis on drinking water? Do you have any information on that? Eric, you wouldn't?
No.
I have a real estate license. I should know that, but I know anybody in Farmington, when they bring up a well test, there is a level where if you're beyond that, you have to have put in that reverse, and I've put them in a lot of times.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know if there is an official level on where that is, but just that the research shows that above 5 parts per million, you should be concerned. And actually, the state recommends testing your water every year if it's above 5, because it doesn't take long for it to go from 5 to 10. And I'm not sure, perhaps you can tell me on that. I'm not sure what kind of follow-up or what kind of counseling people get if they come back with a well test that's 20 parts per million. Does the health department do any follow-up or anything like that? So, people are kind of just left on their own, and I'm not being critical about that. I'm just curious as to, except for the fact of lack of staff and lack of money and all that other stuff that impacts every government agency. I'm just wondering if there's a way we can do a better job or try to educate the public a little bit on this issue.
And that's especially be helpful to the people that are looking for information on WebEx.
Yeah. So,
Amy, did you have some comments or
maybe we can
questions?
post something like that.
Go ahead.
Well, two things. Yeah, on that, I think maybe we could work on, well, maybe we can talk about this when you get up there, but I'm envisioning a countywide testing program and then an education piece, helping people understand what filters they need, when do you clean your filter, maybe we buy filters at a cheap price and distribute them, something big picture like that, because I have my water tested regularly, and it's only because I do it, and I'm left on my own to do it. And I looked the other day because this was coming up. I'm like, oh, look, I'm 3 years late. So, that kind of thing.
It's so easy to, I've thought about doing it for 10 years.
Right.
And
You got to do it.
now that I got in this, I'd be really, I'd lose credibility if I didn't go and stop and get those
Yeah, you
samples.
better get
can
water
tell me where I
bottles.
can get those, please.
We could have some brought in here too if people.
I'd like 2 of them if I could, please.
I'll just
So
have
can I
them-
ask last, so on a different question, moving back to the manure management plan piece. So we've been learning about them in our ordinance work, and it seems, the way I understand it is the manure management plans are implementing and regulating what goes on a field. So a CAFO can rent a field, blah, 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 but it doesn't really show what's going off a field. Like, we don't model a rain event that shows how much is flowing off into our tributaries or groundwater, right? Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically it's what happens to the groundwater. And different soils have different propensities to do that. Some of I was talking to a lady from one of the southwestern counties, and they have a deeper water table and different soil. In the karst areas up around Humani County, there's a rapid change, and if you remove the nitrate source, there's enough wash through that it'll lower the nitrate levels in their wells significantly. Obviously, in the Wanderers area, when there's still high levels 40 years after the fact, that flushing out doesn't occur there. So it just all depends. And there's some work done on different types of tillage systems. And actually, it has something to do with the roots and the wormholes and that type of thing about how fast the nitrate will go down through that soil. And I just I can remember having a discussion with this Mark Borkert about that, but I can't tell you exactly the exact details of it. It's just something that's in my mind that the tillage systems, and maybe you know about that, tillage systems can impact how fast stuff can go down through the soil to the water table.
Yeah, so go back to Supervisor Middleton's question about nutrient management planning, and is it okay if I speak here, or would you like me to go up to the podium?
I think you should go up there with David.
Sure.
You're next on the agenda. It's part of the presentation, so.
Okay.
Can I say a comment first? As Amy was saying about testing and stuff, on Cedar Lake, we have the farmers-led console, and I'm sure you're aware of that. We used to give, the Cedar Lake Restoration Committee always gave $1,000 to the farmer-led console. Well, they turned around and said, give it back, keep the $1,000, and monitor the Horse Creek going into Cedar. And everything has been good.
So there is a wonderful partnership between the Cedar Lake Protection and Rehabilitation District and the Horse Creek Watershed Council, and there is an incentive agreement there, and this sum was $2,000, and it was for stream monitoring, mostly for surface water runoff. You know, it's awful difficult to do groundwater monitoring at that scale, but the Watershed Council has actually been looking into avenues to do more groundwater quantity and quality monitoring. So that's coming. Just looking for more funding sources. That funding that the Cedar Lake Protection and Rehabilitation District provided to the Horse Creek Council has now gone back for further studies with UW Stout, and they're still doing surface water quality monitoring, and it's mostly for phosphorus and sediment monitoring, and it's a result of some issues they've been having on the north side of the lake with some delta formation and things like that. So with that introduction, my name is Eric Wycheck, Polk County Land and Water Resources Department, County Conservationist. And back to Supervisor Middleton's question about nutrient management planning. There is a mechanism within nutrient management planning to monitor sediment and nutrient runoff based on crop rotation, tillage systems, things like that. So it's mostly geared towards phosphorus, though, okay, because it was developed for surface water quality protection. So the tool is called the Phosphorus Index, and within a compliant nutrient management plan, all of the fields need to be below a phosphorus index of 6, and that's pounds per phosphorus loss on an annual basis. And really, it doesn't. The problem with that phosphorus index is it evaluates the field's potential to pollute, but it's difficult to measure beyond the edge of the field because there's so many other things happening between the surface water and the field in a lot of cases that it basically just measures that particular field's potential to deliver phosphorus to the field edge, and assuming it goes beyond. Now, as far as groundwater goes, the best way is prevention, right? So monitoring the inputs of nitrogen fertilizers and balancing it with the outputs and minimizing over applications of nitrogen is the best way to prevent groundwater contamination. And there are other conservation practices like cover crops, no tillage, things like that, that can help that cause. But they are voluntary. They are voluntary. That's right.
With the no tillage system that the farmers use nowadays. I don't think there's even a plow in the market, David, anymore, would there be? And with the no tillage, I would imagine that runoff just almost eliminated.
It certainly helps. And yeah, we have 2 edge of field monitors in that area, and one is on a 30, 35 plus year no-till system, and we get very little runoff each year from no-till systems.
You got a
It depends on
cornfield,
soil.
for example, and you're disking and all that back right in. You certainly aren't going to have a runoff on a cornfield. And I see most of the soybean fields that are done now, their farmers are going right in there as soon as they're done and doing some no-till.
The best thing is, since no-till does enhance infiltration after the long term through worm channels, better soil health, it does, water does infiltrate better in those systems. So it's best when no-till is also used with cover crops, because the cover crops and having a living root and a growing plant in that field can tie up those nitrates, nitrogen
In the subsoil.
in the soil, tie it up in plant matter, and make it available upon decay in the next growing season for next year's crop, so that it's full utilization of those nitrates, nitrogen.
When somebody brings in a soil sample, and I imagine they do every day, you do all the testing right here, do you send it to a lab?
We send it to the lab, and most of the routine soil tests that we send off, nitrogen is a very mobile nutrient. So routine soil tests don't really come back with a nitrogen level in the soil. They'll give you a nitrogen recommendation to put out there based on organic matter and the crop type that's out there. But routine soil tests only give us organic matter, percentage, phosphorus in the soil in parts per million, potassium, and other micronutrients and so forth that you can test for. So that particular test is not a good one to measure nitrogen in the soil profile.
Thank you. And what's the cost?
Through the lab, they're about $9 a sample for a routine soil test. That's just the lab fee. People that do soil sampling will tack on a little more for their labor and so forth.
Rich and Amy?
So Eric, can you talk a little bit about, so the TMDLs in the river, I don't know, maybe this is out of your realm, but I know that Polk County really checks all the boxes for a concern around phosphorus runoff. And can you connect any of this to that piece? And is any of the TMDL stuff driving what we're doing on the land in Polk County?
Absolutely. It has a large influence on what we do in our
Maybe you should tell
department.
people, we're nerding out here. Tell people what we're talking about.
So the TMDL is, it was an initiative in 2010 to 2013, if my memory serves me correctly, to minimize phosphorus impact to Lake St. Croix. And so a 9 key element plan was developed for the counties nearest to the river around us and in Minnesota. And it was a full comprehensive report and plan was developed for phosphorus prevention in our waterways and systems. And that plan's existence allows our department to score higher for grant funding. It drives a lot of what we do in our 10-year land and water management plan. And it is one of those documents that really helped us get the Horse Creek Watershed Council developed. And citizen engagement was a main driver within that document to improve water quality, conservation on the land, and improve the quality of life of the area that we live in, surrounding that St. Croix River. So it's a giant document, and I cannot share with you all of the details in it because it's huge, but it's out there. There's an implementation plan. The DNR checks up on us annually to ask for a report on what we've accomplished. And a lot of what we're doing, we need to identify a phosphorus reduction or nutrient reduction with the practices that we're implementing or recommending. So,
And do manure management plans look at phosphorus also?
that's most of,
What you're looking
most
for.
all, yeah, it's most all of the nutrient management plans that we write or review or cost share are all phosphorus-based plans, and they're looking at phosphorus. And if we write a nitrogen-based nutrient management plan and recommend nutrient applications to meet the nitrogen need of the crop, we're nearly always over applying by 3 or 4 times the phosphorus. So phosphorus is the main driver of these plans, and we write the plans to meet the phosphorus need. And when we meet the phosphorus need, oftentimes nitrogen is shorted in those recommendations. So there's almost always additional nitrogen through commercial fertilizers that's applied up to crop need. And I say that's important to note because we're making recommendations up to the crop need, the need of that crop, and nothing more, because anything more is typically not utilized within that growing season and subject to loss.
Phosphorus is the main culprit. That's the biggest danger we're facing.
Phosphorus is problematic in surface waters. Nitrogen and nitrate is a concern in groundwater.
David, do you have
Yeah,
another?
that was the point I was going to make, is we're actually, while the two are interrelated, phosphorus is primarily the problem that causes the algae blooms and
Yeah.
degradation of the surface waters. Doesn't impact the groundwater very much, but the nitrate impacts the groundwater more and not so much the surface water.
Bob, do you have any comments on as long as we're facing this? Rita, in your nursing experience, especially with Mayo and everything, do you have any examples of how water has affected any of your, like you said, experiences? And
Primarily just the, from our point of view, the health concerns, with contaminated wells and people buying water and having to use filtration systems. I mean, with these large applications, it's clearly going to increase it. So I don't know, I don't have any specific.
people do buy a lot more water for,
Bottled water is not without its own issues, but certainly the plastic is a bad situation again that we're not going to touch on today. But buying water isn't a good alternative either. That's for sure.
that's interesting to know.
Well, I had a conversation with a lady that they have high nitrate levels. She buys bottled water to drink. Her husband won't hear of it, but then again, he smokes and she does it too.
You hear that, Joe?
Let me just ask one. So Eric, I'm trying to think of the equation here that we have a manure management plan that's driven by phosphorus, but we have nitrogen also being applied to the field up to what we model as a crop need and will be utilized in that year, but we have nitrogen in our groundwater. So I'm trying to, and maybe Dave, you comment on this. I'm trying to marry those two things and how we as a health committee should be, what's our action point, our pressure point? How do we address that?
Well, we have to balance productive yields in our egg systems and human health, right? So I think if we're to implement nutrient management plans to the best of our ability, hit the high points of those plans, and have appropriate timing of fertilizer applications, and have a general awareness that we shouldn't be over applying. We can do some of those things. I think we can have great gains. Groundwater is influenced by land use, and I think it's important for everybody to know that. I think outreach and education is a pretty important part of it. If the citizens know where their wells are testing through sampling and so forth, I think that might be the information needed to institute some change.
Eric, do we have any pending grants in your department now as to working with our programs?
With regards to groundwater,
Yeah,
not at this time. We do have, as I said before, in our land and water resource management plan, groundwater was identified as a priority. So moving forward, we do have the hope that we'd be able to do some additional studies like we did in 2019. We are getting more calls and concerns from citizens in pockets of the county, and we'd like to know more about where those wells are testing, just so that we can get the information to those people to know that whether their drinking water is safe or not.
Joe and I are both on Lake Association, and I was to the Big Lake meeting last Tuesday night, and I think all of our lake associations are getting some pretty substantial grants every year for clean lake, clean water, and these lakes generally run into streams or have inlets or outlets. So that's a big source in helping clean up the water is these lake grants.
Most of those lake protection grants do help clean up surface water or phosphorus. As far as groundwater protection and groundwater grants, those I'm not too aware of, I guess, other than the grants that we'll receive for manure storage and things like that.
Rita, did you have one final comment?
I was just going to ask, and maybe it's a silly question, but when you recommend the nitrate that the plants need, you take into consideration how many times they spread manure?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yep. Thank you for that question, because it's pretty important in these nutrient management plans that we credit all on-farm nutrient sources. That is manure and any legumes that are alfalfa or clovers. Those provide a nitrogen credit to following crops. So those are all credited within the equation in a compliant nutrient management plan. And a lot of times when an ag producer will plow down alfalfa, if it's a good stand of alfalfa, no additional nitrogen is recommended other than starter. Or nutrients, I should say. No other nutrients are recommended other than starter for the corn or beans and that sort of situation. So
Yeah, just in the last couple of years now, I see, I think actually most of the farmers, as soon as they combine their soybeans, they're going right in and planting some kind of plow down. I actually don't know what it is. It's got a different name.
Many of our producers in Polk County have been applying cover crops on corn silage ground and soybean ground. We see a lot down in your area, and I'm happy to say that our county has never been greener in the fall than it is in the last 5 years due to
Absolutely.
cover crops.
And
So
I
that's
think
very
that's the
positive.
biggest cure that we can have. So one more question?
Yeah. One thing that everybody has to adhere to is that even 10 years ago, you had a lot more dairy farmers. You don't have the dairy farmers, you got more crop farmers. And what's happening is they're putting these nitrates on, and a lot of these farmers are selling their land for houses and this and that, and you're losing all this land that you could be using for manure and stuff. They're nice, beautiful fields that are just covered with houses. And we're losing a lot of that land. But then in return, you have to have the farmers, you have to have the crop farmers because you got more people to feed. And that to me is a big
I
problem.
think we covered everything pretty well, and David, your biggest resource in water quality, we appreciate that, and Eric, we're really making a lot of progress from the time that I first got on to what we're doing now. It's just astronomical, I think, the progress we're making.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
So if we get more people to test their wells and do these water tests, what do you do if your water tests poorly? Then what are your options besides like an expensive reverse osmosis system?
They're very
Then
expensive.
you have to make up your mind, are you gonna drill a new well, a deeper well? Sometimes that'll work. Reverse osmosis, some kind of filters, that type of thing. Or you make up your mind that you're gonna take a risk that you might get colon cancer, thyroid disease, or your grandchild, if they live with you, may get blue baby syndrome. So, basically, it's like I said, you may not be the cause of the pollution, but as the owner of the private well, it falls on you to decide how you're going to remedy that. It doesn't mean buying bottled water, that type of thing. I drink enough coffee that the bottled water would be way past my budget.
Okay, well, thanks again, gentlemen. And
Thank you for listening, and thank you for letting me present today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
well, I think the thing is where we're gonna go from here. Now we know that you guys are a great resource, and there's some good alternatives.
Mr.
Dr.
Chairman,
Logan,
can I ask
yes.
one more question? What about the city, like the municipal water systems? Are they testing?
They are testing for that. And if, as I talked about Iowa, because I've just been looking at that a little bit, but the bigger cities, Des Moines, Ames, some of the other ones, they have a third of the municipal wells in Iowa are contaminated. And there are filtration systems they can put on, but a smaller community, something the size of Balsam Lake, could probably not afford to put in the technology that it would take to remediate that.
So are major communities like St. Croix, Amory, Osceola, Balsam Lake, Frederick, are they testing their wells?
I'm sure that they are. I mean, they do a pretty comprehensive test. They don't, however, test for viruses, and
Yeah.
that's a discussion for another day, because there's pretty good evidence that things like the norovirus and that type of thing can penetrate down the tissue surrounding, or the area surrounding the well. They're very efficient at getting into the water system.
Tanya, I think this goes along with water quality. I know years ago we had somebody from your department that went to city council meetings and that, encouraging them to keep the fluoridation system in their water supply. Do we still do that?
Well, it's usually up to the municipality if they're going to fluoridate their water supply. We would just go in as a subject matter expert and give them the facts so they could make that decision if they continue to fluoridate or not.
Are most of the municipalities using our fluoridation system? It gets to be a matter of cost on their budgets.
We're finding that less and less are choosing to fluoridate. And the reason is that there's so many different sources of getting the fluoride on the kids' teeth now with the programs in the schools and other ways that they can get it. But we don't tell them they have to. We don't give them that. That's up to them if they want that
You
cost.
know which, I think at one time, Bill, if I remember right, the only municipality that didn't invoke the fluoridation was Centurion.
Correct.
John?
Okay, moving on.
John. Dr. Long.
Oh,
About 5 years ago, we had Gretchen come and talk to the city council plus several dentists.
yeah, I think she was prevalent in that.
Telling how important it is for our kids' teeth. And Antigo took fluoride out of their system, and they had so much dental decay there that they put it back in. However, our city council chose to discontinue fluoride in St. Croix Falls. And so
The budget restraints there, some of these municipalities are using that.
well, they're one of their things was it's too dangerous for the city employees to put the fluoride in or something.
Well, that's another angle.
So there were some concerns, and they first said that people can buy their fluoride for their kids, but a lot of people can't afford to buy all these over-the-counter things. So you end up getting more dental work done, which dentists don't really want to do.
Number 9, Tanya, do you want to move into that?
Can we go back up to the division update, number 7? If we are done, is there any action that you would like from Dr. Clausen or Eric's presentation? I know when Supervisor Duncanson requested it, she had requested discussion and possible action. So I just want to make sure there's nothing.
Today
that the
was the
committee wants to-
informational basis.
Did Dr. Clausen have an opportunity to speak to the entire county board?
He has not.
No, yes, no.
You know, just listening to him, he's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
And I understand maybe it's not politically correct to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, I understand the politics of the CAFOs. I certainly understand all of that. But when we have presentations that are brought to the Health and Human Services Board and we listen to them, and then we make a recommendation through our committee members here to the full county board, it seems to go unheard. I'm just speaking for myself because I think they seem to go against our recommendations. To me, listening to Dr. Clausen is like listening to Dr. Fauci. You know, there are those people out there who think they're doctors, and then there are people who really are the doctors. And it bothers me when the people who are not the doctors are telling people that they're cured, not bringing up any names, and then I'm listening to the people who are the health experts who are telling us what we should be doing. And we're not doing that. And we'll stop there.
I think that's excellent, Bill, and maybe we could propose a resolution. What do you think, Vince? I think, don't you agree that we would be very resourceful to have Dr.
Bill, why don't you propose a resolution?
Well,
Or can we just add it to the agenda on the county board?
You could certainly present that to add to the agenda. The question will be, do you want Mr. Clausen, would you want one of our experts to maybe put it together in a more of a presentation form?
Well, I think that's a good team there, Eric and Dr. Clausen. I think they could probably summarize that in 10, 15 minutes, and it'd sure be worthwhile to,
How does that affect the current resolution that was passed by the county board
Which resolution?
regarding CAFOs?
well, this would be a basic, so here we have this CAFO that everybody is questionable about, and we're making progress on the CAFO. But this is the basis of what we should be making decisions on.
This is the whole county.
I think, I mean, I don't think it changes anything on the resolution unless we go back and change or amend that resolution.
That's why I'm asking that question.
But I guess my thought is I would like, maybe a professional putting together the basis of that presentation, with our analyses, so that I think it would come across as more factual and objective by having our staff do it.
I agree, because
I agree.
he had a lot of information, a lot, but it was anecdotal. 1991 here, 1997 here, this, it was too much. Like you said, you were writing as fast as you can. You can't get it all down. So we need to have it, when you present to the board, it's great. He has a wealth of knowledge, but it needs to be presented in a way that it allows the board to take that information then and do something with it. We can't do anything with what we were presented today. It's great information, but I can't tell you half of what he said because I couldn't write fast enough. So I think it's good to bring to the board, but in a format that is going to allow the board to say, gee, maybe we should add some this particular condition to our ordinance, amend the ordinance to have this condition or that condition based on the information that were presented. You couldn't do that off of today's presentation because you don't have that. It's not enough there to be able to say, oh yeah, it's, we had.
But I think David could do that.
But I
Point
think
one,
what he was basing that off, Sharon, is that attachment that we had in the agenda. That groundwater presentation here is short of being magnificent. There's enough data in here to choke a horse. But I think it's important because I think if you know Dr. Clausen, and I've known him for lots of years, he is anecdotal. That's what makes him a good doctor.
Yep.
And I think the information that he has, he tries to put some humor into it, even though it's a pretty solemn presentation. And to me, it just seems that we've had some great presentations to this board. I'm not taking anything away from Bob and some of the other people that were brought in, but I still think that the cart is before the horse here. The board passed a resolution, the county board passed that resolution, and I don't know if all of the information was out there. And again, it's based on.
They passed the resolution with the intention that we could amend it based on if we wanted additional conditions or if we wanted to remove any of the conditions that were in the ordinance.
well, let's not really have a debate on that.
No, but how long, then the next question would be is, how long do you have to add those amendments? Is there a timeline on it before it would go into effect?
Oh, forever.
No, it's in effect now, right?
Yeah, it's in effect
Correct.
now.
And then we can add whenever.
The information Dr. Clausen has is local. It's basic. It's to Polk County, and I'm sure he can send, now this is A point, B point, and make that really short and understanding. That's
Well,
informational.
There's 2 pages of statistics in this groundwater report to the legislature that gives all 72 counties in the state. And it talks about the number of private wells that were tested, the 10 parts per million over the nitrate standard, and the estimated number of private wells over the nitrate standard, which would be 5 parts. So I think there's a lot of stuff there, and I don't think Dr. Clausen is one of those individuals that's gonna, wants to bore you with the statistics.
No.
So
It's
how do
there.
you take that and put it in a presentation to the board so then they can take away from that? Because they're not going to go through that whole thing line by line. I mean, they'll fall asleep before they,
Well, what we'll do here.
But they couldn't read it, Sharon.
yes.
Wait a minute now, folks. What we'll do here is I'll talk to Tanya and I and Vince. We'll come up with something and we'll get a presentation. We'll work with Eric and Dr. Clausen and we'll come up with somebody to address this water quality. That's the basic, that's the topic.
Yeah.
And we'll go from there. Okay, Vince?
Yeah, I think the information on the nitrates is excellent. I thought Eric's differentiation between phosphorus and nitrogen is important and its impact. And then laying the foundation of what those two chemicals mean will enable us to then develop, do we need to change policy or so forth.
And what we need and what we had here today was we had some local people, some local information, working with our staff. And that's the basic of what we want to present, right, Vince?
I think so, but
John, I have a couple, about 3 questions. One is, if any of that information on the wells have been tested in Farmington Township, does anybody have a list of those wells that have been tested or what they?
Our county has a list of, believe everybody that brings in a sample.
I mean, this information could be, you could maybe look at it since you're a Farmington Township resident. Maybe you could look at that and see what that impact is.
We have we as a result of them tests, if you have a sale or something, it's mandatory that you have one of these reverse osmosis in every bathroom. I just had a sale of some property last year and I put one in the upstairs bathroom, one in the because there's a possibility you could be drinking upstairs and downstairs.
Yeah.
That's a requirement.
Well,
Make a lot of progress.
But the second thing is that maybe this would, then we should be, maybe this presentation would spur people throughout the county to start testing their wells.
That's our goal.
You know, whether we do it ourselves, finance it ourselves, or we get a grant from, maybe we need to look for a grant to help the low-income people who can't afford a well test.
That's why I asked them of the cost of sample. Amy, one more question?
Well, that's what I would just follow up on that. And that is that, to me, the clear take home from this presentation was we need groundwater testing of our citizens' wells and education about the results and what you should do. And that was
Our
really
goal.
clear that he said we should have a countywide plan and there's grant options. So I think the action take home from today is staff should help us figure out where these grants are, how are other counties doing it? Because I know a couple other counties that are just doing countywide drinking water plans. They're doing it all over in Minnesota. I mean, it's huge in Minnesota. So I think that's the take home to me and the action piece. And I don't know if that's with us or with Eric or whoever it is, but it really is like, what is it going to take to do a countywide drinking water test? How do we have an education about the results? So Joe Schmo knows they need to put in an osmosis and or not. And we can start educating our population about it because we know people are drinking contaminated water, clearly from what he's saying. And so we should be helping figure that out and providing the technical assistance.
That's our goal here, is to get people to
So-
bring in samples. And I think they all bring them into the county, don't they, Eric?
But until we have, like, I agree, until we have,
Timeline.
what's the next step then? Because they come in, they bring samples in, they say, they come back and they say, your water's contaminated. And they go, now what?
Right.
We need a now what?
Right.
We're the initial source here, and from here, we want to, like, our goal is to bring it to the county board.
Yeah.
Does the county have a grant writer?
No.
Because the reason I asked was because we're, I have a cabin on Deer Lake, and the Deer Lake Association has the owner of the Butterfly Gardens in Amory writes grants for the
Oh, yeah.
for,
She's good.
for, the Clear Lake Association, and then she would be very knowledgeable about water issues, and maybe she could be contacted and see if she would help, help write a grant for the county on this.
That's why I asked the question to Eric, is there any grant sources in, through our county?
It's possible, and I've made a note to check with our neighbors in Dunn County, and I know St. Croix has secured funding for a large groundwater study. So I'll reach out to my counterparts in those counties and ask what they've done. And as far as grant writing, that's something we as staff at the county do quite often. And
Okay, let's move on to we gotta cover this nuisance, on number 9.
Progress.
Tom was going to kick that off.
Okay, Bob, appreciate it.
Just to piggyback on what we were discussing, that groundwater quality inventory initiative from last year, in which Health and Human Services and Land and Water partnered with, is, it was part of this watershed, the watershed we're standing in right now. It was a volunteer program, roughly 30% response rate. So, some type of extension of that or county-wide one, contingent on a grant to subsidize those costs. We certainly have the staff. We understand the process. A short-term outcome of that inventory was that those folks who did not score well, whose wells did not perform well, were contacted. And that's a positive outcome to let them know, creating that awareness that yes, we need to do some additional testing, mitigate it for another whale, have some sort of filtration system. I think we have the capacity to do that.
What percent of the people who were in bad wells did they do something about their well?
Dr. Lagus, it's in your packet.
Okay.
We scrubbed it. In other words, we took out that personal identifiable information because they're volunteers.
Yeah.
So those were scrubbed from the report, but as you can see in the packet, identifies some of those impurities, particularly chloroform, the nitrate levels. And then a really general geographical location. We just kept in there the section, township, and range. So we didn't have the actual address.
Good job.
Yep. So if this is of any help, or at least any indicator as to what's going on. Notice there's a lot of variabilities there. And, if you need to drill down more, it's more or less site specific why they had higher bacterial levels or higher nitrates. So I guess my point is, an additional larger scale groundwater quality inventory could be considered going forward. So thank you, Chairman Bonaprise. I just thought I'd talk about that. On to agenda item 9A. This is simply a quick recap where we're at with the nuisance and health human hazard ordinance. Just to provide some context, the executive committee, after review of all of past year's resolutions, earlier this summer identified this effort as something to do. At their August 8th meeting, that's the executive committee, they referred it to this governing committee. And if you remember in your packet last month, we had the first attempt to draft and combine those two ordinances. And most of that was done by Jason Cheesit. we have reached out to Brian Hobbs because he's a big piece to this, and particularly the health and human hazard ordinance.
He's kind of the boss of the project.
Yeah, he needs to be involved. So, this is a big thing because it's cross-divisional. You could argue that it applies to public protection, it applies to community services, and it applies to environmental services.
The biggest thing about writing this nuisance, and Bill, you had some information on this, is there's so many things that can be legal and aren't legal. So how do you find that minimum ground there?
Chairman Bonner-Price, that's a great observation. One of the biggest challenges is the metrics. In other words, putting in measurables so enforcement can follow through, whether it's looking for compliance, but we need to understand what's the measurement of odors, the number of junk vehicles, etc. So that's a big challenge. And so what our approach is going to be is staff is suggesting a complete rewrite of both ordinances and compiling them. Now, we took our first stab at rewriting it. It's mostly focused on the nuisance part. We'd really encourage, Brian and his staff to look at the health and human hazard piece and rewrite that. And then our approach is have the county administrator appoint a work group consisting of staff. And some of the staff we have in mind is like someone like Brian Hobbs, someone from zoning, a county planner, some folks from public protection. I'm volunteering to be involved. Perhaps one of you all would like to be involved. And going forward, what we'd like to see is perhaps Brian could be directed to rewrite his section. We've done the nuisance piece. Then convene the work group for us to collectively go through, identify measurables that we can apply that are not subjective, but are measurable and enforceable and easy to measure. And then periodically come to this committee with updates and elicit your input as well. The executive committee didn't really give us a deadline, but that could happen. But ultimately, run it by you all, and then eventually, I believe it needs to go back to the executive committee. So that's sort of a recap of everything, and that's going to be our approach.
Your emphasis on this is cross-divisional is very key. In the past, we've had projects like this where you nominate or you put together a plan. But it seems like a lot of times you put together that plan and you say, okay, now this division has to enforce it. So we're trying to get everybody involved early on and develop this thing, not so that it's all encompassing, because quite frankly, this is the kind of thing that can go haywire. If any of you have been involved in town boards, very difficult to enforce. So if we can identify the top opportunities for each division, whether it be the sheriff's department or environmental services or health, we're going to try and keep it as simple as possible, I think.
And the two key people that you're right is Brian Hobbs and I would say Malia, because if you follow any municipal or town, any kind of government at all, you'll see where somebody, as soon as they have something, hey, this is my rights and you're infringing on my rights. And frankly, I think usually they win.
It's a dilemma, so that's why we want to target those things that matter the most.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. Amy?
Can I ask a question? Is the operation ordinance under this human health ordinance, and where are we at with that? Like, because operation ordinance got sent to this committee, and so under the CAFO, the COP got passed, and this might, Bill might help some of your pieces about where we're at with that, because the conditional use permit was approved at the county board, But then the caveat, the marching orders we had from that resolution was the Human Health Services Committee do the operation ordinance side of it and implement that. So I was expecting that on the agenda, but maybe it is, and it's under this Health and Human Health, or what?
No, Supervisor Middleton, this is completely something different.
It is separate,
Yeah,
okay.
this is nuisance and health and human hazard.
Yeah, that would be
You
part
could
of
argue
this.
they're sort of,
This is,
I was wondering if,
came out of, like he said, this came out of the executive committee.
okay,
Writing just strictly news orders, wouldn't have anything to do with that.
okay. And so
Go
when
ahead,
is,
Bob.
when is the,
The operational based ordinance as it applies to large scale agriculture. That's in your wheelhouse now. I'm not.
so Tanya, when does that come on our agenda? Where are we at with, I think that should be on our agenda every month until we get it done. So
Add it to the work plan if that's what you're requesting.
I think so. I mean, what does that mean? Vince, how does that work? I mean, how do we,
We
like,
can discuss it. I know from a practical standpoint, we were saying, we had sent a letter to the DATCAP to say, give us your feedback. DATCAP has, for whatever reason, said, we're going to wait, or not wait, but we are assessing this and we'll get back to you. We haven't received anything yet. But our thought was that would kick off that
okay.
topic now. But if we want to put it on kind of a standing item on the agenda, we could do that to say, what's the update? But that would be, you know, do we have information to share and discuss or whatever? So
Because we could do some work on the findings of fact piece, like we have to develop that. So if there's something that we can help with or get updates on where we're at, that would be a piece that, I mean, that's the piece that I think Malia is working on and is the gap that we need to fill in with this.
We gotta get
Operation.
back on track here as the reason why Bob is there and the presentation on just nuisance ordinance. And then we'll open it up
Oh,
for
sorry.
other things.
That's all I had.
Any other questions for,
So are you going to be getting input from the towns too? I mean, I know from the town of St. Croix Falls, we contact you guys every once in a while
Right.
about nuisance stuff and how do we handle it and what do we do? I think the work group wouldn't hurt to get some
We
input.
have from the town. of
Okay,
St.
good.
Paul.
I think the Towns Association, they meet every month, Bob?
They do.
And I know this is one of their topics.
It is
And
recently.
because the townships are heavily involved in this nuisance ordinance, everyone is, that's where it starts.
We
People
should
come,
remind them. I was at the last Towns Association meeting.
and request, well, what you want to do is request that it be on the agenda. So they
Okay.
can get information to you and carry it on to Bob. So, thank you. And then Tanya, we'll turn it back to you. Big thing is our budget items. Are we going to have any special requests?
Well, for this year, we are not making any special requests. COVID has been if there's anything good about COVID is we've received a lot of grant funding to be able to fund a lot of the operations that we do.
It's helping our general budget.
It's helping, yeah. And our placements are low because we can't place kids because of the COVID restrictions. The other part of that, with everything being shut down, the abuse isn't being reported as much as it had been previously. So we decided to take the approach that we would remain status quo with our budget recommendations for next year because things will eventually
So we
open.
aren't going to have any additional budget requests from our department.
No.
Okay, that's good news.
We're doing good this year.
Don't let that fool
It's,
you.
yeah, I think it's a
Right.
It'll come back and bite us.
Exactly.
But I will say our department managers are doing an excellent job at maximizing revenues, reducing placements when they can, and really questioning the type of placements that we are making when we do make them to make sure that the people that we're serving are in the least restrictive setting, which would also have a budget impact on us because less restrictive usually means lower cost.
I think a fair question being where our supervisors, do you expect a few amendments to our budget at November 10th?
You mean, do you have amendments you are thinking about?
No, I'm just, as outside of our department right here, we aren't going to have any amendments, any departments that are going to request additional funding.
Most of them have been pretty efficient at getting those to me in advance. So I don't know that our divisions are going to be asking for additional ones. I'm sure that supervisors, my limited history shows they like to surprise me with some amendments at the end.
Well, like last year when after we did pass the budget, then we did fund a additional drug officer.
Right. And as you can imagine, anytime you work on a budget, I welcome those suggestions and ideas early in the year so that we can vet them and discuss them over time. Certainly if there's an emergency need or something that comes up, or if we see there is opportunity in the budget, a supervisor certainly has the right to do that. But I'll be bringing up the general overview of our budget here at the next board
Tuesday
meeting.
night, correct.
We've been going to each of the committees. If there's any input or feedback, most people have gotten that to me. But I will double down on what Tanya said, though, and hats off to Tanya. I would say her division has done a better job than most at identifying duplication of effort, identifying ways to hold people more accountable, like the child placement places where we send children to ask them what they're doing to help get this child brought back home and so on, or what they're doing to help them. And, it's funny when you scratch the surface and investigate and ask questions, how efficient things become. So hats off to Tanya and her staff.
It's always our biggest devastating cost if we have any placement. Okay, resolution 4520. Vince, you want to address that, being our health officer isn't here?
Sure, our vet
veterans, I mean.
person, Andy Bustler, could not make it, and he asked, this is a resolution that you have in your packet, which is basically a lobbying resolution. If I find the right one. The Veterans Service is obviously dealing with a lot of cases where maybe suicides with our veterans, where they have special needs and so on. There is legislation introduced in the U.S. where they are encouraging basically financial support to veterans officers, veterans groups to support our veterans. And so all this is a resolution that would enable our clerk to send a letter to our legislators, to the governor, to all the county governments and the federal government to say that we support funding for our veterans to support the, things like mental health.
So what we should have here is try and get a unanimous support from our.
I so move.
Yeah, that you would, somebody would,
Yeah, I would like to see a unanimous support for resolution 4520 from our Health and Human Services Board. And Joe, I will accept your support for that. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
You got that, Madam Clerk?
Question,
Question?
what are CVSO/TVSO officers?
The first one is County Veterans Service Officers, and the second one is Tribal Veterans Service Officers.
so our veteran service officer would be Andy Butts.
Yep.
Andy, as you know, is the one that he works downstairs here, and the veterans come in and they help them identify resources to get health support, mental health support, financial support. It's unfortunate, but many veterans don't know about these services that are available. They provide their service, they come home, want to get on with their lives. Things may catch up with them, whether it be PTSD, whether it be physical ailments or whatever. Some of them are unemployed and so on. They don't have financial resources. What Andy does, as good as anybody I know, is help them, one, talk about what they need, and then find them resources to get that. And all they're asking for is, hey, give us the financial support to enable us to do that job better. Because they're
And
still
that is a responsibility of every one of us that's here. And we all know people that are been veterans. We all know people that are needing help and supporting help. And get the word out there. Hey, we've got an excellent veterans staff and health veterans officer. He'd be glad to just listen to you.
And they do a great job. Our grandson was wounded in Afghanistan, and the veterans officer at that time that was here was so helpful for him, working with him with the VA. He spent time at the VA too with a lot of the veterans that are from here over there, that go over there. It's very helpful.
And the transportation is provided. If you want anybody that needs transportation, transportation is free. Just go in and talk to them. They'll set up appointments.
They pay a copay through the ADS.
Yeah, well, yeah, small copay. I know we have drivers. Okay, all in favor of supporting resolution 4520, say aye. Aye. Motion unanimous, and then that'll go to our county board. You write that up then as unanimous support, Madam Clerk? Thank you. Identify subject matters for November 10th meeting. That'll be at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Does anybody want a COVID update?
Yeah.
We'll go back to number 7 and put that under the update. Okay, so we had a little bit of spike over the weekend involving a couple of schools. We had 2 positive cases at school, so that's a completely different operation with students being excluded who were exposed. Otherwise, we received quite a few positive results on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So our health department was really hopping through the weekend, trying to get people notified. It looks like our rate of positivity right now is 3.47%. So just over the weekend, that went up a whole 0.5%, which is significant. I'll always point you guys back to the county's main website. And I printed off a couple extra if you wanted to see today's data.
How many copies of that do you have?
You want? I can pass them all to you. It just gives you the snapshot every day of what's happening in Polk County. What you want to pay attention to, the number of isolated is 73. That means we have 73 positive cases that we're monitoring right now. The recovered is the total number of positives who have recovered from their illness. And then the negatives are the total number of negative tests that have been done on county residents. I did check too, and we're looking at changing this up just slightly to make it more user-friendly. I think there's confusion by the number of hospitalizations. That's a cumulative total. We have 2 people currently hospitalized right now. So we'll put a current and then maybe the cumulative total. I think people are interested, and maybe you guys give me your opinion. Do you want like the current number that we have hospitalized or more?
People get confused. I took a bunch of people that I know that I was together with and showed them how to go to the side and enlarge each little thing, and then where it tells you which one's cumulative, which one's current, because they didn't get that.
We're trying to keep it as simple as possible on these bigger numbers. So if you just pop on the website, you can take a look and know where we're at in the county.
Anything else to be added?
Can I add on just a little bit? So at the last committee, I believe Fran, Supervisor Duncanson had asked about community notifications if a restaurant has an exposed individual and why we were or were not doing that. At that time, we did not have any incidences that would rise to that level of notification. We did have one that came through on the weekend from another county of a restaurant in our county, but the recommendation from the state now is we assume there's community spread everywhere. So we will not be singling out any restaurants where individuals had attended. The messaging that we will be giving and sending out to the public is that you just need to make sure and assume that it is, no matter where you're at, it's there. So if you're going into a restaurant and it seems crowded, you make that your own choice about whether you enter that restaurant or bar or grocery store or whatever it is. But make the assumption that there's spread, somebody might be in there that has it. So wearing your face coverings, sanitizing, distancing, so protecting yourself and making sure that you can do that on your own would be our new messaging that we are giving.
Honey, can I ask? Okay,
Go ahead.
Am I missing? Sometimes I look at that dashboard on my phone, so maybe it's compressed, but do we have the positivity on there?
The rate of positivity is on there. It's up in the top, kind of in the right hand, and that's for
Oh,
Polk
it must be
County.
cutting off then. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You can enlarge each one of those text boxes.
You can.
And it is harder on a mobile phone to be able to look at it.
Okay.
So the other thing, somewhat related to COVID, even though there is not a vaccine out for COVID yet, we are offering flu shots for the public. Appointments are encouraged, but we will always take a walk-in. This year, because of distancing, we need to do it a little bit differently. Our building here is not conducive to spacing people out as much as we would need to. So we've set up mobile flu clinic over at the Catholic Church in town on the next 2 Wednesdays, October 14th and October 21st. I believe they start at 9 o'clock. So we can do the community testing. Elders are encouraged because we have the high dose, and they would qualify for the high dose, and then we have the other dosage for the other age groups.
What are the hours for that?
I believe it's 9 to 12, Dr. Lagos.
Thank you.
Hey, Tanya.
Yes.
This is Sabrina. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but have we had any positive cases of influenza in Polk County yet? I know we recently had 2 hospitalizations, influenza cases in Barron County.
I don't know that, Sabrina, but I will check and send out to the group.
Anything else anybody wants to address? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait, do we have on the agenda the next agenda items?
Yes, wait, I just called for that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. So the 2 that I had was groundwater testing and what a work plan might look like and grant funding options. And then the other one is an operation ordinance findings of fact, kind of where we're at and whether we need help on that. So those were the 2 things I had.
So our next meeting will be November 10th at 10 o'clock, and then we have a budget meeting that night for our final vote on the budget to present. That is just, that's what we present to the press now. And
I'm sorry, say that again.
our passing the budget on Tuesday night, now that is what we present to the press.
On November 10th, yes,
Correct.
that's when we pass it.
Motion for adjourned. And thanks, Rita, and I guess Bob, everybody else is fine.
I move we adjourn.
Motion by Supervisor Middleton, supervisor by.
If you would like a groundwater
All
test
fair
kit,
say aye.
I have the supplies up here and the fee schedule.
Those are out of here later.
So
Custom yourself.
you actually send it right into the lab in Colfax, and here's the fee schedule. We don't,
I just wanted to.
And just going back.
Karen.
Oh, I can make a copy.
Thanks, Madam Clerk.
You're very
You
welcome.
have too much hair to be Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, they do a lot of testing.
And you look good.
I can tell you that I'm not as knowledgeable as Dr.
Okay.
You know, just
And
reading about
question
him and
mark
listening to
by
him, I mean,
Wisconsin
he's so
right
knowledgeable
here.
what's going on, and nobody wants to listen to the guy.
Fauci.
Yeah, he is.
Rita.
Very
Yeah, it is.